You don't address climate change without the world's biggest emitters changing course. 4 territories are responsible for more than half of the world's emissions. They are China, Europe, India and the United States. The US is responsible for 11% of global CO2 output, and President Biden wants to reduce American emissions.
The United States sets out on the road to cut greenhouse gases in half by the end of this decade. That's where we're headed as a nation.
That's the ambition. Some don't think America means it.
The Biden administration doesn't seem to take the climate crisis the least bit serious, since they are actually expanding fossil fuel infrastructure. So it shows that they are not ready to take action, which is unfortunate.
Well, let's look at America's promises and how they compare with its actions. And some progress has been made. US emissions peaked in 2005. They've fallen since, and President Biden wants to reach half of that peak by 2030. Christiana Figueres masterminded the Paris Climate Agreement. This is her assessment.
Is actually the largest additional national reduction proposed in this round of 2020 and 21 climate target updates. So very significant.
The target's true significance, though, will be if America hits it. And this projection shows us the US is not on course. To change that will require a major shift, as the BBC's North America editor John Sopel explains.
It's going to require people to change their behaviour, the way they drive in a gas-guzzling economy, the way people heat and cool their homes, the way industry operates. And then, of course, you're going to need to get congressional approval for much of this, and it's far from clear that the votes are there.
As John Sopel says, this comes down to personal and political choices, not least on energy. President Biden wants US energy to be carbon-free by 2035. Key to that plan is how America makes its electricity.
We just set a record in 2020 of building the most wind and solar we've ever built here in the US. And we need to continue growing those sources and winding down fossil fuels, especially coal-fired generation.
This is about using fewer fossil fuels and producing fewer fossil fuels. The president has acted on this too. He announced a moratorium on all new oil and gas leases on public lands and waters. But as this headline from AP notes, US drilling approvals have increased despite Biden climate pledge. That's on land already leased. The president also cancelled the Keystone XL oil pipeline. But, as this New York Times story reports, other pipelines are being allowed to proceed. It's a decidedly mixed picture on fossil fuel production, on energy and on transport. It produces more emissions than any other sector. Transport emissions are going up in the US. They make up 29% of the country's emissions. In response, by 2030, President Biden wants half of car sales to be like these, electric. Right now, though, it's not half. It's 2% of sales. So something has to change.
The big push right now is on building the infrastructure that gives people comfort that as they move around this big country, they'll be able to charge their vehicles as easily as they can pull up to the gas pump.
That's the big push, but for it to happen, 2 giant pieces of legislation need to become law. If Congress votes them through, the US is much more likely to hit its targets. But the Republicans aren't keen.
This administration and House Democrats are working frantically to impose a witch's brew of reckless energy policies across the entire nation. At a time when inflation is at its highest level since 2008, these policies make it more expensive for American families to heat and power their homes.
Cost is one concern, and as we saw in this campaign ad last year, jobs is another.
Have a transition from the oil industry, yes.
No oil? That means no jobs.
Yes.
That means a state depression. To protect our jobs, defeat Joe Biden.
But it's not just Republicans who want President Biden to change his plans. This is Senator Joe Manchin. He's a Democrat, he's chair of the Senate Energy Committee, and he earns thousands of dollars a year from fossil fuel investments. He wants a slower transition from fossil fuels. Putting it this way.
Basically, I'm totally committed to innovation, not elimination, because I think we can do it in a practical, responsible way.
Politically, this is hard going for President Biden. And while Congress decides America's future actions on climate, we already know the present and the past. America emits 16 tons of CO2 per person per year. That's more than double the per capita rate of Europe or China. America is responsible for 20% of all historic emissions. And now America's president has ambitions to do things differently. The US is aiming to be carbon neutral by 2050. That's marked by the red line. But America right now is the blue line. Again, it's off track. And unless more of its people and politicians are persuaded to do more about emissions, there will continue to be a significant gap between American targets and American reality.